There we go. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Baron Collins Hill. Welcome to MandoLessons Live. I nearly fell off the rails with that tune. That was the Cash Jig, a classic Irish jig in the key of G, and then it's the tune of the week. So we're going to play that together at the end, but I always get it mixed up with, I think, Timothy Clifford's. I think that's Timothy Clifford's, or Timmy Clifford's, and I always get those mixed up. So I just barely saved myself at the end there. Hope you're all doing well. Great to see everybody tuning in from all around the world. Let us know in the chat where you're coming in from. Hope you're all having a good weekend so far. We got Dan and Sheldon and Robert and Sherry, Will, Rebecca, Jim, Alan, Lewis, Joanne, Deidre, Betsy, Denise, Jim, Jennifer, James. Lots of J's in the chat. Love to see it. And Anna. Hope you're all doing well. Let me know if this is your first time in the chat. Let me know how long you've been playing mandolin. Let me know what you've been working on. Let me know, most importantly, any questions you might have. That's sort of the purpose of this hour. I love answering questions and seeing what people are into, what they're thinking about. And yeah, no question too advanced, no question too simple. It's all fair game, and I love spending this hour with you, and hope to jump into it here. So yeah, that tune I played was the Cash Jig, classic Irish tune in the key of G. I don't play that one all that often. It's a total classic, and I should play it more, but somehow it just doesn't come up in my brain all that often. Bluesy endings always welcome. Well, you often get them with me, just because that's what my brain does. All right, let's see. Terry, Edward, Troy, Tim, Reed, good to see you all here. First time, just got a mandolin 2 weeks ago from Will. Very cool. Welcome to the wonderful world of the mandolin. It's fun. Glad to have you here with us. A little bit of upcoming events. We've got a couple things going on. Next weekend is the formerly March Mandolin Festival. This year it's the May Mandolin Festival. Next weekend, you can find out all the information at marchmandolinfestival.com. Got postponed, but that's fine because now it just gives more people time to show up. There's going to be a bunch of classes. It's Marla Fibish, David Surratt, and myself doing a whole weekend of a bunch of great mandolin stuff. It's going to be super fun. Looking forward to hanging out with you all. And then there's going to be a concert live streamed, I believe, on Saturday night. But it's going to be a good time. If you look on the website, marchmandolinfestival.com, you can find out all the details. Hope to see you all there. Also, in June, I just got the word that June Main Fiddle Camp, which you can find at mainfiddlecamp.com, is June June 18th to 21st, a weekend of mandolin classes. I'm going to be teaching some mandolin there. It's going to be a good time. There's a bunch of people here that I have seen at Main Fiddle Camp in person and also in the virtual camps we've been doing during the pandemic. So those are what's coming up in my world. What's coming up in all your worlds? You got any cool stuff going on? Evan, excellent. Alan, good to see you. Anna says, playing mandolin again after about 15 or 20 years. Just learned Liverpool hornpipe. Cool, Liverpool hornpipe. I feel like that's one of those tunes that I know a different name to, but I can't remember. But any hornpipe is good in my book. Daisy from Atlanta, good to have you here. Oh, excellent, you're going to be at the March Mandolin weekend. The May Mandolin weekend. Excellent, look forward to hanging out with you. Jennifer says, I've been playing mandolin about 1.5 years. My biggest struggle right now is playing chords and melody together. Any tips for learning to combine them? Definitely. I'm going to get an instrument with a normal number of strings. It's sort of a process, and I do have lessons on this on my website. And I'll probably do some more in the future. But there's sort of it's definitely a process. The first thing you need to do is you need to know the melody. You need to know how to play the melody on your instrument. Then you need to know how to play the chords behind the melody. Just like if you're playing Whiskey Before Breakfast, you gotta know the melody. And you also gotta know. So practicing both of those. And then from there, what you need to do, a good exercise is it's kind of a mental leap to just play the melody and say the name of the chord that's happening. D, G, D, A, D, G, D, A, D. And then from there, Whiskey Before Breakfast is kind of a notey one to choose, but I'll stick with it just for the sake. From there you say, okay, what can I do here? Well, I've got, so in my little series, you can find this series on my website in the Technique and Fundamentals section near the bottom of the page. It's called the Double Stop series, because I think of sort of chord and melody playing at the same time as sort of an extension of double stops. Maybe what you can do is say, okay, that A string sounds nice as a drone, and again, I'm just kind of breezing through this, a lot slower in the little series. The A string sounds nice as a drone, and so does the D string, so we're going to turn into sometimes you might need to finesse the melody a little bit to just kind of make it so there's space to put a chord in. And then from there you can start thinking, okay, well, if I've got that D, I'm kind of halfway there with those kind of droning strings. And then maybe let's throw in like part of a D chord, but always keeping the melody note on top. You don't want to add too many kind of drone or harmony notes above the melody because our brain likes to hear the melody on top. So we go. And throw some of those chord shapes that you know underneath it. That's a super quick version, but again, on my website, the Technique and Fundamentals section, and then the Double Stop series. It's definitely a process, but and it'll be slow going with the first couple tunes that you try it with. Try sticking with one key, like D or G, for the first couple tunes that you kind of try to work through that process, and you'll find yourself immediately starting to use a lot of the same kind of chord shapes and finger patterns, and your hands will kind of repeat a whole lot of muscle memory if you're playing out of the same key, and that should help you get your feet on the ground, and then from there just doing it a lot and kind of dialing in that skill. All right, let's see, checking in from New Hampshire, first time live. Good to have you here, Christine. Good to see New Englanders in the chat. Switching between chords and melody is always a stumbling spot on some tunes for me. Yeah, I think one thing you can do as a nice exercise is take a tune. Let's take Whiskey Before Breakfast again, because that's where my brain is. And just take it as a practice to do like one phrase at a time of each. So it just makes you switch back and forth. So it's like melody, chords, melody, chords. something like that. And you know, slow it down by all means to a spot where you feel comfortable, or pick a tune that you know really well, that you're really enjoying. And then, you know, just force yourself to go back and forth in quick succession, and you'll find little spots where, you know, I was kind of struggling in that A part. So like the way I would normally play the melody is something like that. But I was struggling a little bit, like to go right to chords there. Sort of, it puts your hands in a bunch of different situations where you're like playing a melody note in a certain spot, and then you need to figure out how to go from playing that melody into chordal stuff. Excuse me. Really kind of in quick succession, and it'll put your hands in a lot of different situations where you have to kind of figure your way out. So that's my advice on that stuff. Let's see. Lewis says, been working on sprucing up Swallowtail and Fly Around My Pretty Little Miss. The S2Cs are helpful. Oh, simple to complex are helpful for that. Yeah, it's definitely good to, you know, find whether it's a recording of like your favorite album, or some of my play along jams, or the simple to complex things. Just kind of putting yourself in a repetitive situation where you're playing a tune over and over will definitely help you dial things in and kind of get you comfortable with playing some of those double stops and generally sprucing things up, as Lewis put it. Alright, let's see. Got some maybe Portuguese going on in the chat, which I love to see. I love it when I can't read the chats, because that means people are having a good time all over the world. Great idea on the chords. I can use that for piano too. Yeah, I'm sure that, I don't know anything about playing piano, but I'm sure that would work as well to some extent. FEG 953 from Tennessee, good to have you here. Can you use guitar strings on mandolin if they are the same gauge? You can. Most mandolins have loop end strings. So down here, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this, but the ends of the strings are little loops. But on a guitar, they're ball end. I don't have anything with visible ball ends at the... Oh, here we go. So it'll be a different... so like here you can see these are ball end strings versus loop. So that's the difference. Mainly. But you definitely want to make sure that you know, that just like will or won't work. If you get, I did that when I first started playing banjo. I was like, oh, I gotta get some extra strings, and I bought like half a dozen sets of strings, and they were ball end for a loop end instrument, or vice versa. And there's ways that you can try to make it work, but it's pretty finicky. You can try to pop the balls out of the strings, but then sometimes the loops break. It's kind of a hassle. So definitely figure out if your instrument will take the right strings, and then you really want to make sure that the strings are actually the same gauge, because if you put not enough pressure, or if there's not enough tension in the string, it won't feel very good, it won't sound very good. And if there's too much pressure, then you're gonna potentially do damage to your instrument. But if the gauges are the same and you can use the string, yeah, you can definitely do that. I use a lot of, because I have a lot of like octave mandolin-y sort of strange instruments, I get a lot of bulk strings that are guitar length in either loop or ball end. So I can kind of design my own custom gauge strings. Where would you put triplets in Boys of Blue Hill? Great question. I can't tell if I'm playing too many or not enough or just perfect. I mean, it's definitely personal preference, but how does Boys of Blue Hill go? Boys of Blue Hill. Uh-oh. Huh. I can't remember how it goes. I'm going to cheat here for a second. Blue Hill. Excuse me while I just look on my own website. Oh, there it is. You can put things like there. I think, you know, a lot of times I just don't play a whole lot of double stops on hornpipes. But you can. So like none would be. And a lot would be. I would say in general with hornpipes, if I am playing triplets, it's not so much those sort of like snappy triplets like you would hear at a jig. You could probably find ways to put those in, but I generally do kind of like more melodic, kind of noted, fancy triplets, rather than going like you can go triplet, triplet. Great question, though. I'd say you just keep playing around with it, and whatever sounds good to your ears is the way to go. Do you use the one-finger A chord trick on other chords? I do. I use a lot of kind of one finger on two sets of strings, or four strings, however you want to think about it. So you can, there's a nice like B minor sort of, what is it, B minor 7 to 2, I don't know what that is, but I like this chord. It's like the A shape, but 4/4 open open. I kind of use it as a bit of a or also I do the same thing for the E minor, 2 and 2 on the middle two sets of strings. Or you can make a G major 7, 2 and 2 on the A and E strings. Kind of jazzy. So anytime there's really two strings right next to each other, I tend to do that. Or two kind of similarly fretted notes in a chord. Or like this E shape, which I don't use a whole lot, but it's like 4, 2, 2, 4. It's like your D shape up 2 and bring in the kind of your pointer finger behind. That's the same sort of thing. So yeah, I do tend to do that a lot, and even melodically sometimes I'll do like right there I'm hitting both as a melodic thing, just to cut down on moving. But either way works, you know. It depends on kind of the string spacing on your instrument, the size of your hands, the kind of the setup of the instrument, everything, and kind of what you're comfortable with. I even end up doing that on guitar, which is very, I think, uncommon, but and it kind of confuses people if they're watching my hands play guitar. But it's because a lot of my chord shapes look weird because I'm just like mashing one finger down. Because I played mandolin first, where you can get away with it. Good question, though. Jam fingerstyle, good to have you here. Guitar strings don't have a loop at the end, yep. Apparently I just missed you the other day at the instrument store. Told the guy that you recommended them to me, and he said, what store? The one I go to the most out here is Strum in Southeast. You recommended them. That's my kind of local shop to me. There's so many great music stores here in Portland. Yeah, hope to run into you someday. Would you explain why and how to put on those little rubber washer things in the strings? I understand it has something to do with the string sound or vibration, also placement. So placement of them doesn't really matter. So what we're talking about here, I'll get one kind of in the middle. Let's see. There we go, you can see it. These little rubber washers, what they do, they just pop in and out. It's a little awkward, but what it does is it cuts down on that sort of that noted sound. So when it's out, it kind of makes a little bit, and it's very slight. I'm not, I put them in all my instruments because it's kind of a habit, but I kind of am more overboard on them than most people. But then you put it in, and it cuts down on a lot of those like high twinkly vibrations. And in terms of where to put it, it doesn't really matter. Like you can put it right there. Or all the way down at the end. It changes the sound. Mostly what I'm doing is cutting down on like any sympathetic vibrations and like really high pitched stuff. So that's a little more high pitched by putting it way down there versus there, but both are much better to my ears than that. So they just slip in and out. It can be a little easier to kind of get them in there when you're changing your strings, especially on the headstock side of things where I've got them in there as well. And the same idea. So yeah, that's how I use those. Love the notey triplets. Awesome. You seem to be repeating. Yeah, YouTube does that sometimes. Just listening to an episode of Mandolin and Beer with Sharon Gilchrist, and she was talking about using chord inversions. Do you use them much or tend to stick to standards? I think it's definitely good to work with chord inversions. So that just, you can think about chord inversions on a mandolin in a couple different ways. You can think about it just sort of in terms of some of your, this is a great question. I mean, kind of classical chord inversion is, like, if you have a chord that is C, E, like if you put like your fingers on a C chord on a piano, you have C, D, E, F, G, and you hit C, E, G, but you can't actually hit, so that's like a first inversion chord with the root and the bass, but you can't actually play that chord on the mandolin because you have C, E, G, and you can't, E and G are on the same string. You can, and then your next string up is A, so you really can't play C, E, G. Maybe I can find it somewhere else. So yeah, you could do it there. If you do 10 on your D string, 7 on your A, and 3 on your E. But that's really awkward and a huge stretch and kind of hurts my hand. But so that's sort of classic first inversion, and then second inversion would be E, G, C. Again, you need to figure out E, G. Again, you got that really awkward shape. It's a lot because the mandolin is tuned in fifths. It's hard to build chords using thirds, like you have your classic C, E, G. So you need to space them out differently. So that's why you get like, a very comfortable chord shape on a mandolin for a C is open, 2, 3, open. So you have G, which is the fifth, E, which is the third, C, which is the root, and then E. So it's not built on thirds, it's built on like sixths, and then 1/3 at the top. You have G to E is a 6, E to C is whatever that is. I think a 6th, yeah. E, yeah, is a 6th. Major 6, minor 6, and then C to E is a third. So you're not always going to have those stacked thirds of like a classic first inversion, second inversion, third inversion chord. But what you can think about that is really useful is to think about what note is in the bass. So a classic example is an A chord with the root in the bass, so an A, versus an A chord with a C sharp in the bass, which is the third. So classic A with a root in the bass. Let's just use this kind of power chord, A, E, E. That actually doesn't have a third at all. You can add one with the 4th fret on the A string, or do that. So that's got an A in the bass, but you put the third in the bass with a C sharp on the G string, 6th fret. You have 6 to open, open. You get... It's a very full sounding chord versus... And then to put an E in the bass, you need to leave the G string out entirely. Makes it a little kind of thinner sounding. So experimenting with inversions, which on the mandolin often just means like what you kind of have to pick and choose your intervals because it's hard to do straight stacks of thirds. Ooh, there's a tongue twister. Straight stacks of thirds. It's hard for me to say. But definitely play around with it. It's great. It's really helpful to kind of think about what notes go into any given chord. Even if it's slow going, just, you know, think about it for 5 minutes a day or something, and it'll slowly build your understanding of chords and what different inversions sound like. And it's a good way to think about, you know, it's also sort of the jumping off point for a lot of bass lines. So like when I'm doing... You know, that's a lot of stuff moving around in the bass, and what I'm doing is I'm just kind of walking a bass line from the root, or the first inversion, to the third, or second inversion, through that B, which isn't an A chord, but it sounds good because it's a melodic movement from the first inversion to second inversion. All great things to think about. Improv question. Jazz players, by throwing... Okay, jazz players throw recognizable melodies of one song over a common chord changes. In bluegrass, do people frown upon that? Like it's not being true to real improv? I mean, I think it's just personal preference. People will definitely do it. Like you can do, if you're playing... Blackberry Blossom, when you go off into a solo, throw in a little like sailor's hornpipe. It's just kind of like people often call it like quoting, or probably something else as well, but it's, I think used sparingly, it's cool. It's a good way to kind of think like, oh, like what other melodic things can you kind of get in? I think some people get tired of it and just like don't want to hear it at all. I don't mind it in a little bit, but if all of your solos are just sort of like, oh, I'm gonna just like quote Looney Tunes all day, that's just gonna, you know, it's a little like over-referential. But I think it's mostly just personal preference. People do it in bluegrass for sure. Yeah, but definitely try it out. It's a good way to kind of practice with your ear of like, okay, how can I fit in something that I already know into a different context? Nice. Mike says, you did go to Strum. That place is great. Yeah, they're gonna do. Sam does awesome work. I bring them instruments. They usually have instruments of mine in for work or consignment or whatever it may be. They got a lot of cool stuff. All right, those big stretches for chords are tough. Yeah, I don't really do those. Trying to stretch my hand for chop chords. Any advice on exercise for stretching tiny fingers? I think, you know, first of all, it just takes time. It's a process that takes, you know, months. It's not a process that takes hours or days. That said, there are a couple ways. When I'm building like this classic G chop, something that's helped me in the past is play a G chord. You know, you got to kind of build it. So often people will start like, well, I know this G, and then I'm going to put my 5th fret on the D string, and then I'm going to add the 7th on the G. that's a good way to do it. But also practice building it backwards, just for like a different way to use your muscles. So like first 7 with the pinky, then 5 with the ring, then 2 with the pointer, then 3 with the middle. Just kind of build it upside down. If you find yourself always like starting with the first string with your E string and getting that sort of classic G shape down, and then kind of building on that, see if you can go backwards and kind of build from 7 5 2 3 rather than 3 2 5 7. And beyond that, you know, just do it a little bit every day and your hands will stretch out. You know, when you're first starting to do that, you're using like every muscle in your whole, like all the way from like your core out through your arms. Every muscle is really working on like, how can I get this to work? And the more you practice it, it's not, part of it is kind of stretching, but I think a lot of it is just kind of the natural progression of your body figuring out like, oh, I don't actually need to use 95% of the muscles that I'm using in my body to sort of force this movement. Just through repetition and sort of paying attention to your technique, you sort of figure out like, oh, here's how I can do this comfortably and not kind of push every muscle and make it really feel like a stretch. You just gotta do it's a little bit of stretching over time and kind of getting used to using new muscles that you haven't. But a lot of it is also just kind of subtractive of like, you end up using less muscles than you initially do because your body doesn't know like these are, it's very, I don't know how to describe it. It's a very like physical sensation of like, this is what a G chop chord feels like. But if I say like, oh, here's that diminished shape that I never really use, like right now, trying to get that shape under my fingers, which I don't do, just like trying to get in there, I can just feel every like muscle in my body like, oh, what do I do to do that? I'm gonna like just put everything to work to make it so whatever happens I can get that shape. But for this one, I've just done it so much that I know subconsciously like what is required. Great question. Dance Tune says, I wanted to get better at sliding to the 7th fret on the lower strings as a substitute for the next open string on fiddle tunes. Any tips? I would say just do it a lot. Let's see. So, I would say, you know, like pick, like if it's Whiskey Before Breakfast. I would say a good kind of mental practice is just try to be really hyper aware about when you have a natural inclination to do that move. And every time you do it, just like, first off, just notice that you either want to do it or you hear like it, oh, that's a good spot that I could do something. And then maybe when you find yourself like, okay, in that, I often do that in Whiskey Before Breakfast. Get that slide from 5 to 7 on the D string. Just pull that out of context and repeat it a lot. And then put it back into context. And every time you find one of those, just pull it out and turn it into a little exercise. Hello from Germany. Welcome. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Upcoming video on these shapes. Oh, I don't know what shapes I was doing anymore. That's the problem. Do tell me what shapes you're interested in learning, and I'll do my best. I've just already forgotten what I've been doing so many shapes that I can't remember which ones I was doing when you added that comment there, Evan. Any tips to help with strumming? I can pick up a melody no problem, but my strumming stinks. I've got a strumming series on my website in the technique and fundamentals section. It's just different strum patterns, because it really depends. Like, do you want to do this strumming? Or do you want to do... Or do you want to do... Or do you want to do... there's so many different strum patterns. I go through a bunch in that series and break them down slow. And also, just don't be afraid to just, do what feels natural. It doesn't feel natural to strum, but I think your brain, there's a lot of kind of natural intuition to just like, your brain will hear little rhythms and be like, okay, how do I do that? Even if you're not playing chords, just like, along with your favorite record, just like, do this. Play drums, essentially, just by muting the strings. And that'll just get your right hand used to moving up and down. Try to keep that down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up pattern going for reels. And most tunes, if it's not a jig. That's my advice on that one. Great question. That G chop is tough, not just the pinky stretch, but it's back to the middle finger on the E string. Yeah. It's that it definitely takes time, I remember the first time I saw somebody say like, okay, here's your G chord, and they did that. I was like, well, this instrument isn't for me. But just like keep at it, and your fingers will slowly stretch out, and it'll feel more comfortable over time. Also, know that if your hands don't do that, there are a million ways to play a G chord that sound just like this, that isn't that shape. So here's an example. Those all sound pretty much the same, especially, in that bluegrass chop style where you really just are looking for that rhythm. You don't need all 4 sets of strings. You can do it on 2, 7 and 5 on the G and D string. I do that all the time. It's just the bottom, the 2 bass notes of the G chop chord. It's the difference between like, I am a man of constant sorrow, and I am a man of constant sorrow. I see trouble all my days. It's indistinguishable a lot of the time. Jim says, when I try chop chords, I clench my jaw, so hard my hearing aids pop loose. Oh no. Yeah, that's definitely it's good to be aware of that though. Like I have a friend in college who was a drummer, and he was just constant, drumming is such a physical activity. You really got your whole body moving, and he was constantly aware of sort of like where he was holding tension, and he was always like, because his head wasn't like actually moving as much as the rest of his body, a lot of his tension would just like end up in his jaw or in his neck, and it's kind of a constant thing to be aware of, to just like, it's good practice just to notice where are you holding tension and how can you get that out of your playing. Often chop 2-finger chords, G and D, totally. Strumming kind of falls into a swing even though I want to keep it straight. Yeah, I think with that, doing that, just muted kind of drumming, if you want to play real straight but still groovy, just put on like a really straight ahead bluegrass album or whatever it is that when you think like, I want to play, what would you say, I want to keep it straight but I start to swing, like find whatever the best example to you of a really quality straight sound is, and just spend time, it's all in your right hand. Any kind of swing is just in your right hand. So like put on a record that really exemplifies that straight feel to you, and then just don't need chords. Chords aren't any part of it. It's just the feel. Or you can put on a metronome. And like, whoa. And nice and straight versus kind of adding some swing. Definitely good things to work on. Christine says, my pick seems to get hung up. That's definitely a good friend of mine who also is a great mandolin player and teacher and teaches at Maine Fiddle Camp. Has a, what is an equivalent of kind of putting the pick through the strings as like sweeping a floor. You know, there's only a certain amount of downward pressure you need to put into a broom on a floor in order to like collect all the dirt. And it's the same thing with the mandolin. So, you know, you've got this much space to play with, but you don't need your pick to go. Let's see, how can I get this a little more? You know, you don't need your pick to be down in here. Just need to go across the top. And if you find your pick like kind of getting snagged, just kind of work. You can either grip the pick a little further down, or just kind of, if you do hold it back here and that's what's comfortable, you know, don't pick in here, but just take it back out. So like when I play, like it's hard to do in this angle, but you know, there's not a whole lot of pick going through the strings. Versus like, if you dig in too much, things get snagged real easy. Sometime back, Roland White did a tutorial on chop chord alternatives. Cool, I'd love to see that. How about some practice tips for increasing tremolo speed? And just a quick one on the metronome. I'm using this program called, what is it called? Metro Timer. It's just an app on my phone. There's a ton of them. I think it was free, or like $1 or something. But you can change the speed. Whoop. You can make it, you can also just tap. Say, okay, that's what 91 beats per minute sounds like. Oh, once it's actually going. There's 47 beats per minute. And it's got, you can make it so it like flashes your, it gives you a little visual cue as well. Yeah, and it has various things. Whoops, hit a button I never hit before. Anyway, it's called Metro Timer. So I've got a Apple phone, iPhone, but I'm sure there's apps, all kinds of apps out there. Okay, so tips for increasing tremolo speed. I think a big part of that really comes back to that same kind of broom technique of not digging in too much. So I think metronomes can be super helpful. You know, so if your metronome's here, see if you can get like at 90 beats per minute, see if you can get 4 in between clicks. And then make sure you're nice and loose. And then bring it up to 95 beats per minute. And then up to 100. And only do, you know, these small increments. And at some point it will become, you know, I'll jump now just for the sake of brevity. 125. a nice smooth tremolo. And you know, that's a very mathematical tremolo. That's, you know, there's so much expression you can also put in, you know, rather than just going. That's fine, but you can also play with volume and intensity and speed. There's all that sort of stuff to play around with as well. Yeah, give it up for Glenn. Glenn Loper, great mandolin player and teacher. A fellow Maine Fiddle Camp regular and devotee. Sherry says, when I do tremolo, I actually turn my pick a little bit sideways so it flows over the strings easier. That's a good point. I actually just do that all the time. And I do that, like my pick is usually kind of parallel to the floor, so if I dropped it, it would just land flat. But the neck of the instrument is actually usually at an angle. So it's kind of hard to see, but you know, the pick is actually at an angle to the strings rather than being straight too, and that, you know, whether I'm playing melodies. And that also goes for kind of like the getting the pick caught in the strings thing. If you look at my beginners series on my website or here on YouTube, it's all, I talk about a lot of that sort of basic technique stuff. Unusual request, my brain tells me that excessive finger movement is wasteful and inefficient. It is. That is not. Any idea on how to retrain to avoid this? That's a great question. I mean, it's a hard one. I don't really know. I mean, there's things I've heard people say, like, just keep your fingers, like, when you're going up a scale. So, Will here is talking about, like, what a lot of people call, like, flying fingers, which is the difference between and so kind of like removing excessive kind of finger movement from playing. One thing people will say is, like, once your finger's down, keep it down until you need to pick it up. Which I think is good advice. It's hard because so much of that is a really kind of ingrained natural movement that it's a slow process. Again, it's not a matter of hours and days. It's a matter of, like, months. You don't want to sit there and, like, practice. It's such, I don't know how to describe it really, but it's such a, it feels very involuntary to me in a way that my brain tells me, like, oh, it's just how it is. Like, there's nothing to be done. It's just how your fingers work. But it's not, and you can work on it. So just like a little bit, you know, 60 seconds a day or 60 seconds every time you pick up the instrument. Maybe work on that, keeping fingers down. And anything you can do, it's not going to be a linear process. It's a very kind of inside thing to think about. It's important though, and it definitely. There's also, I think, a certain natural. Your hands will naturally do that because we're lazy creatures and we don't want to use any more muscle than we need to. So, like, if you're at least, like, kind of cognizant and paying attention to sort of what your hands are doing, and you're noticing that you're using too much kind of errant finger gymnastics, then I think if you just keep your mind on that and say, like, oh, let's see if I can do this in a way that isn't, even if you're not working specifically on exercises, I think over time that will also kind of lessen. Inversions as well as one-finger chords. Yeah, that's like, I have some two-finger. I do a lot of two-finger chords. Not so much one finger, but I mean, you can do a lot with one finger, especially if you kind of limit the number of strings. I'll definitely keep that in mind. Charles says, have trouble using the metronome. I'm never sure which notes should fall on the beat. Any suggestions to help with that? So in general, I mean, it's a little bit of personal preference, and everybody uses a metronome a little different. But I usually use the metronome on quite a slow setting. I never use it, you know, I never set it here. I'll set it here. I think a great way to use it, like set your metronome at like 80, and then just an exercise that I did for a long time that I should get back into because I've kind of fallen off the ability to do it, is just start by every beat on the metronome. I'm going to slow it down even more. I'm going to 60. Every beat on the metronome gets one beat on the instrument. We can do a scale. Now do 2 to every beat. Whoa. Now do 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 4. And then from there, if you want to get fancy, you can try 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 6. Maybe put in jig picking at this point. Down, up, down, down, up, down. Whoa, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. There it is. Or 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 8. I think I'm going to hit my limit here. Whew, too fast. Just locking up. My technique was getting away from me there. But that's the idea, is like, just, it's a really great way to work on kind of a physical and listening skill connection with various subdivisions, really kind of working on, you know, some of those it really took me a little while. I would like overshoot it or undershoot it, had to stop and reset, and then, okay, I got it back. And that's after I did that exercise for years, for a long time, and it's still not easy. But it's a really good thing to do, just to kind of, it's a great way to work on subdivisions and hear them and sort of feel the physical side of those subdivisions. Yeah, James is talking about that kind of flying fingers. Yeah, planting fingers in advance of chords and note changes is useful too. Yeah, like some of it just comes from, you know, kind of knowing what comes next and being like, well, I know I need a D chord, so I'm gonna, you know, get my finger there, rather than being like, oh right, the D chord, and having to like fly and do something drastic to get there. Yeah, and it is very dependent on kind of what comes next, what comes before, and what the moment calls for. Very good point, James. While we're on scales, I have a G and D major scales down, but don't know what to practice after that. Any tips? I think it depends on what kind of music you are running into that you don't know how to play. If you're playing like old time music, then maybe an A scale or a C scale, both major. Or if you're playing Irish music, you can work on like an E minor scale. You know, what I would say, figure out what keys the music is that you're playing in, and then practice those scales. Thank you, Andrew, for the super chat. Oh, missed it. Yeah, if anyone ever misses it, you can always watch these back at any time. They're just archived here on YouTube. And Denise's excellent. If you go to MandoLessons.com, click the green live Q&A button. Denise does some amazing kind of sorting of these things, and she breaks down into topics. And when I play tunes, she links to them, so you can do all that sort of stuff. Yeah, for the most part, you're always hitting the beat on a downstroke. It's sort of like if you're tapping your foot, your foot is 99.9% of the time, unless it's some weird syncopation or some kind of outside weird music that I don't tend to get into on my website. Your pick and your foot are kind of hitting at the same time. Or with jigs, you get down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. And that's the reason for that double down, is so that you're always hitting a downstroke on that beat when your foot's tapping. But then in that exercise with the metronome, when I was getting into some of those farther if it's an odd subdivision, so like 3, 5, and 7, the downbeat is going to be, you're going to kind of break that rule. So that's kind of getting a little further out. But in general, kind of tune playing and melody practice and general pick direction, your foot is always going to go down when your pick is going down. So that made it a little misleading. All right, wow, we're already at 11 o'clock. Let's play a little Cash Jig, and then I'll send you all on your way. Don't want to keep you all too long. But I'll try to remember how this tune goes. The way this works, it's a Irish tune in the key of G. It's a jig. It's a classic. We'll play it together. I'll play the melody. You play the chords. Then I'll play the chords while you play the melody. We'll pass it back and forth. It's a good way. If you don't know the tune at all, see if you can just pick up a couple notes here and there. It's great ear training. If you do know the tune, but it's new to you, it's a great way to just play it through a bunch. Make sure you got it all under your fingers and spend some time with it. If you've been playing it for a long time, you can always, try to add some double stops or some slides or some triplets or whatever it may be. And then, just challenge yourself wherever you're at. So here we go. It's what is it? Cash Jig. I gotta remember how it goes here. No, that's not it. Is that it? Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. So, Cash Jig. I'll play the melody, you play the chords, not too fast. If it's at a speed that you don't like, you can always come back later and speed it up or slow it down with the little gear icon once YouTube kind of gets it into their system and it's available for replay. So, right about there. 1, 2, 3, 4. B part. You go. B. B2. Oh no! A2. Go! One more, let's all play the melody. It's a fun one to play down the octave if you're feeling spicy. Going out. All right. There's a little Cash Jig. That one got away from me again, and I went back into Timothy Clifford's at one point. But I think I got myself back out. Apologies if I confused anyone. Thank you all for hanging out. Someone can remind me, I feel like we had a tune for next week. Actually, it's not going to be next week because I'm going to be and hopefully seeing all of you at marchmandolinfestival.com. Now May Mandolin Festival, but still all the information at marchmandolinfestival.com. It's going to be a great time. Whole bunch of mandolins hanging out for a weekend. There's going to be a concert. There's going to be a bunch of workshops. Just a bunch of good hanging out. Hope to see you all there. And if somebody can remind me what... I feel like we're kind of a couple tunes that we've already picked out to play in the future. So whatever's after that, just for the records, if somebody can remember what that tune is for next time, throw it in the chat. Or if you got suggestions of what it might be, also throw that out there. Or if you have something you'd like to play next. Oh, yes, Woodchopper's Breakdown. Ah. There it is. That's a great tune. I'm going to have fun with that one. So yeah, 2 weeks, we'll do another one of these and some Woodchopper's Breakdown. But next week, see you all at March Mandolin Festival in May. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for all the super chats. I think I missed a couple there at the end, but thank you all so much for the support, whether it's through super chats or donations via PayPal or Venmo, or there's a bunch of patrons here. And patrons also know that there's a patron-only live stream once a month where I get to do this, but I actually get to keep up with the chat a little better, dive deeper in to all that good questions and topics. We did the Jig of Slurs last week, but it's been getting a little confusing. Anyway, thank you all for the support. Really appreciate it. Couldn't do it without you. And see you soon. Bye-bye.